Welcome to Beat Diabetes. We're going to continue today with my interview with Peter Van der Plas from the Netherlands. We're going to go to him describing how he first approached his type 1 diabetes. He wasn't a typical type 1 diabetic. He struggled with high blood sugar and some form of diabetes for years before, but finally they diagnosed him as type 1, and here's Peter telling us what he did initially.
Yeah, so I was not binging on cakes or anything like that. So I would not eat something big more than once a day. But my meals, of course, were still like containing 60, 70 grams of carbohydrates. So way too much now that I know more about it. But yes, I also started to learn actually only after that point in time that all these things. Injecting insulin, for example, also contains a lot of uncertainties. You have to put it in your skin instead of that it's being released by your pancreas. So there's time delays, maybe not always the same amount of insulin entering your body. And my digestion became worse. So typically you get this gastroparesis, of course. That also happened to me. And I started to learn all those things, but I didn't do anything with it. So I knew them, but then there had to be a guy, a book to point this out to me that if you combine it with the right diet, then if you take small doses of carbohydrates and small doses of your medicine, of your insulin, then it sort of is still possible to balance things out to not make too large mistakes.
Yeah, who was that guy that pointed that out to you? I know who he was. You've told me, and I would have guessed anyway, but some people may not know. So give us his name and the name of the book.
Dr. Bernstein. And he talks about, and I think that summarizes it all. He talks about the law of small numbers. So if you want to deal with something that is very uncertain, which is almost stochastic in nature, I would say, for which the rules of the game change every time, then, make small steps and give small inputs to your body, and then also the outputs, the blood glucose values will be much more moderate. They will start to fluctuate far less. And then we're at the point where I started low carb.
Peter ran across a doctor by the name of Richard Bernstein, one whom many of you know very well and who has been a great hero to me, and I guess you could say a mentor, though I've never met him. And Dr. Bernstein was a type 1 himself. In his own life, he had a fanatical quest to normalize blood sugar. And he thought, surely there's got to be a way to do it. And he read some reports about how they did it with rats and animals. And he thought, I think humans may be able to do that. So Peter ran into that, into Dr. Bernstein, that is, and read his book, Diabetes Solution. And it kind of turned a light on. So Peter began to follow Dr. Bernstein's recommendations. Dr. Bernstein found this out when he tried to normalize blood sugar as a type 1 diabetic. He found out that you just can't do it if you eat high carb. In fact, you can't do it if you eat what we would consider normal carb, 50, 60, 70 grams of carbs per meal and a couple of snacks throughout the day. He's like, it won't work. And so finally, he found a way to do it, and that required him to cut his carbs way down. And Peter ran across Dr. Bernstein. He thought, well, let me try that. And by the way, Dr. Bernstein began to apply that same method to type 2 diabetics, and lo and behold, he found it works for type 2s as well.
There are a lot of nice stories on your channel and elsewhere in the keto carnivore space about people reversing their diabetes in 3 months, losing a lot of weight, all those things. But in 3 months, their HbA1c goes from 13 to 5 or 6. Well, I'm going to take it one step further up. I'm making a bold statement, but I think with type 1 diabetes, in theory, you can not reverse, but you can beat diabetes in a matter of days.
Well, that's an interesting thought. I'm not sure I totally agree with that statement, or even would recommend that you try to do it in a day's time. Not sure that you could, but I hear what he's saying. What he's saying is, since you depend on insulin, and basically you're trying to match your insulin with your carbs, if you lower your carbs way down, guess what? You need to lower your insulin way down as well. And you find it works very well. You can get in range pretty quickly. Now, some of that is going to depend on if you're a type 1 diabetic without being insulin resistant. If you're a type 1 and you happen to be insulin resistant, you're overweight, you've got fatty liver, fatty pancreas, that's the worst of all scenarios. So if you're not insulin resistant, and probably most type 1s are not, in that case, you can see amazingly quick progress in getting your blood sugar from way out of range and out of control into being in control and in range. But of course, there is another issue, and that's learning how your body works, how to match your insulin as a type 1 with your carbs. In fact, it took Dr. Bernstein probably a year and a half to really figure things out very well. It wouldn't take as long today, probably, especially since you can ride on the shoulders of Dr. Bernstein plus the CGM. He had no CGM. So he had a very primitive glucose measuring device, and he had to stick his finger every time. But Dr. Bernstein finally got it figured out, and what Peter is saying is, because of CGMs and because we can learn from Dr. Bernstein, you can get your glucose in control quite quickly, oftentimes.
Type 1 diabetics, well, they can be. They are usually not insulin resistant. So when I started to go on low carb and started following this approach of Dr. Bernstein, an approach that you have to learn about it, so you don't do it right from the beginning. But when I started, basically my blood glucose values the next day were perfect. If you would wear a CGM, you would immediately see that it's okay. And then you start to fine tune. And well, I'm not going to say it's easy, because for me also it was not easy. And although my blood glucose values were good the first day, then of course I made mistakes on the road, and it was not 100% in range yet. But yeah, you got this sense of control, right? It's that's the big thing, the big motivator that you need to continue.
You were giving yourself insulin according to what you were eating, and when you radically slash the carbohydrates, you can't keep taking that same level of insulin. You need insulin, but you don't need that much. Were you aware of that when you first went low carb? Did you have some hypos where your blood sugar dropped dangerously low? Because that could definitely happen if you're not careful.
Yeah, no, sure. And there is one good aspect of the Dutch medical care system is that they motivate people to self-regulate, particularly type 1 diabetics. And I already did that a bit. So yeah, I would sometimes skip a meal. So I did realize that in that case, I don't take a bolus. And I would sometimes also adjust already my basal rates at the insulin pump.
Well, what are the advantages? Now, you've been on both sides of the fence. You've been type 1, just kind of trusting in your insulin pump to take care of whatever you ate, not really worrying so much, although I'm sure you tried to limit your sugar a bit. Now you're following Dr. Bernstein's recommendation of a very low-carb diet, and you moderate that with lesser insulin. Has that improved your general well-being, your general health? How is it different for you these days compared to before you started this program?
Yeah, most definitely the biggest factor is constancy, I think. And yeah, for me, the mental aspect was really problematic. So the fact that I was doing my best, and before going low carb also, I was measuring a lot. I had an insulin pump and a CGM and all these things. I do really my best, And that, I felt really wronged by the fact that doing my best, that the outcomes would always be disturbing my daily life. And I think a good example is to compare it with my eating pattern before low carb. So I would wake up and then in the morning start with a bowl of yogurt or something with granola in it. It's not super sweet, but anyway, something that adds up to 40, 50 grams of carbohydrates. Then I would leave the house and start biking to work. So you're starting up your system and you get this dawn phenomena that actually promotes your body to secrete even more blood glucose. So blood glucose would be going up while on the bike my food is not digesting yet. Then I arrive at work, perfect blood glucose levels. I start working, I'm sitting still behind the desk. Then my food starts to digest. And then around 11 o'clock in the morning, I would have a value of 11, 12, or 13. And I would have to take a break to walk it off. While others would be working, and then I would actually be working around lunch break because I had to catch up. And this kind of things. So I also like to compare it to being like a high-functioning alcoholic. So I had all these things to deal with. I could not perform at work as I wanted, but I tried to find ways to, let's say, do suboptimal and do what's acceptable. And if you would give a presentation, for example, just do it sufficiently and get it done. And then I can get back to my own things.
Now, how is that different from today?
Yeah, that's really different because I don't have those, like you hear in all the stories, I don't have those large fluctuations in my blood sugar. And for me, there the mental aspect comes up again. So I don't have to get angry because of high blood glucose values and just do my thing. And I have somewhat the feeling again that I'm leading a normal life. And that's a big thing.
I love that last statement. I'm living a normal life, and that's a big thing. Amen, 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 Peter. Living a normal life. And that's where type 1s and type 2s can agree. That's what we want, a normal life. Now, as a type 1, that doesn't mean he doesn't take insulin. He does. So you may say, well, that's not very normal. He's got to inject himself with insulin. But not very much because he keeps his carbs low. The insulin that he has to inject is not so much. And that means he doesn't make so many big mistakes and he doesn't have a lot of hypos. And for the type 2, it's the same thing. We want to live a normal life. We want to keep our glucose in range. We don't have to, most of us don't have to take insulin. And many of us, I would say most type 2s, don't even have to take diabetic meds if they can get their diet controlled and low enough in carbs. But what we want is a normal life. We don't want our diabetes to affect us so much that we can't enjoy our life. And guess what? That's true for me. I'm living a normal life. That's a big thing for me, and it can be for you as well. Do you need more information and inspiration about beating diabetes? The very first line of our description is nearly always a link to our hundreds of videos toward that one subject, how to beat diabetes. Click on that link and start watching these videos. You'll be blessed and I believe greatly helped.